The conflict in Ukraine has reminded the world that racism and intolerance is still a problem, with Africans subjected to racism and discrimination when they tried to cross into Europe from Ukraine. Dr. Saths Cooper, the president of the Pan-African Psychology Union, joins us now. Dr. Cooper, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to The Full View.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Now, the citizens of Africa were subjected to inhumane treatment while trying to leave Ukraine. Are we failing as the world, as a globe, to address racism and intolerance?
Well, very clearly, because even the news outlets have been portraying this as a war where the victims, and war is terrible and shouldn't have happened in the first place, but the Ukrainians as one of us, Christians, they look like us, and all sorts of racist statements that have been on electronic media in particular. The governments around that area tend to be very, very bigoted. Poland in particular has a clearly neo-Nazi government, and the specter of what hit the world in the late 1930s is again with us. But it seems that because Africans are caught in the crossfire, they are lesser beings, and we should never ever forget that European colonialism created the problems in Africa. And now when our children are out there studying, others are out there working, they are denied passage against all conventions of the United Nations, the Geneva Convention. But some of these leaders are adamant. And we heard the kinds of comments made by the young student who arrived this morning, brought over by South African Airways. We've seen the cries of distress from other students caught up in the Ukraine, how they were thrown out of trains in the Ukraine, and so on and so forth. So racism, yes, Simpiwa, is very much alive, well. The colonial sequelae of why we in the continent suffer the way we do have not been addressed. Some countries attempt to do that, but really it is time that the AU addresses this, not play a pussyfoot with the European and other Western leaders, because we are the cradle of humanity, and there is no reason why our people should be treated as inhumane as lesser human beings in this manner. We all deserve the same respect, the same treatment, and othering that happens in times of crisis shows their true racism.
No reason at all, no reason to be treated in this manner. And do you get a sense then that the United Nations, especially the Refugee Agency of the United Nations, is doing enough to ensure that member countries are able to deal with the refugees in times of conflict?
You know, I think each agency tries its best. But we should not forget that out there in the world, this problem of racism and othering reared its head. During COVID, it was there. The murder of George Floyd, we saw the outrage. But, you know, on the continent, there hasn't been outrage. We have not protested this. It's time we actually woke up and said, this far and no further. We will not allow you to treat our children, our people in this manner. And because of their wars, we've seen waves of refugees in the Mediterranean. And you've seen the racism where at border posts on the high seas, people were turned away and so on, all because of wars, not of their creation. So if we look at it, the West is squarely responsible for where we're at right now. Of course, Russia shouldn't have engaged in this kind of escapade. A war is terrible. But if we look at the world since the United Nations was created in 1945, 4/5 of all the wars and invasions have been at the behest of the United States of America. Yet they make sure they fill us with arms, they extract our raw materials, and still treat us in this way and through their surrogates in Europe.
Well, did African leaders act swiftly to assist their citizens? Well, we've seen some of the citizens being evacuated or being assisted, to fly back home. But did African leaders act in the most, brisk time possible?
I don't think so. I don't think they even anticipated that this would go to this extent. But immediately the war began. They should have taken steps to do the necessary. Some countries were on it, but unfortunately, many African nations fell short. I think they still expected the old colonial masters to behave in a civilized way, and civilization actually is at stake right now.
Now, this conflict, Dr. Cooper, is being discussed in our homes and children are watching the news. So what do you think is the impact on society, well, especially children who may not necessarily understand what's going on?
Well, I think that we need to be able to explain to our children that the world is a dangerous place, that their roles ought to be to understand what's going on. But at the same time, we should be very clear we don't create a paranoia amongst them. It's important also to build a sense of self. If our children know who they are proud of who they are, they can take their place anywhere in the world. All of us have the same biology. It is our external appearance that tends, melanin and perhaps texture of hair, that tends to make the kinds of outrage happen. However, let's also recognize that diversity is part of humanity. Imagine what a dull, boring world it would be, Simpiwe, if all of us looked like me or you, spoke the same way, thought the same way, danced the same way. We are a diverse human family, and it's time we cherish that common humanity.
All right, Dr. Cooper, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.